So shortly after the tragic events of September 11, 2001, something remarkable began to unfold. Amidst the collective grief and shock, a wave of alternative theories started to emerge. These weren't just idle speculations either. Many of them were heavily circulated online, discussed in forums and chat rooms, and even brought up in media broadcasts.
Right, and a lot of it was driven by sheer disbelief. People couldn't fathom how the collapse of the Twin Towers could be caused by just the plane impacts and fires. Folks began asking, could something else have been at play? That's where the idea of controlled demolitions took off, isn't it?
Exactly. It seemed improbable to many that two iconic skyscrapers could fall so precisely and completely due to fire. And theories claiming government foreknowledge gained steam, especially when it was revealed that agencies like the FBI and CIA had failed to act on certain pieces of intelligence prior to the attacks.
Oh, and let's not forget the role of some big personalities pushing these theories. Alex Jones, for one, became infamous for amplifying claims of a so-called inside job. His platforms like InfoWars turned these theories into mainstream conversations, even if they were, well, a bit out there.
Jones wasn't alone either. Groups like Architects Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which includes professionals challenging the official story, also gave weight to these theories. They questioned the structural collapses with technical arguments, sparking debates that remain heated to this day.
I think it's fascinating how much skepticism there is towards government explanations. I mean, after the attacks, a lot of people were already distrustful, especially over things like the lead up to the Iraq War. The timing fueled suspicions, didn't it?
It did, and the media at the time didn't help. Sensational reporting often amplified these doubts. Plus, there was this underlying need people had to make sense of it all. It's easier to believe in a grand conspiracy than grapple with the randomness and chaos of that day, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. People crave clear answers, even if they're not the right ones. And that emotional need, paired with the internet's growing influence, created, well, a perfect storm for these theories to thrive.
Indeed, and over the last 2 decades, it's become clear that these theories aren't going away anytime soon. They've evolved, diversified, and continue to attract followers, particularly as new platforms spring up to share them. Building on that foundation of skepticism, let's take a closer look at one of the specific claims that has gained traction over the years. The idea that the Pentagon wasn't actually hit by a plane, but rather by a missile. Proponents argue that the damage to the building simply doesn't match what you'd expect from a massive airliner. They point to the hole in the wall, saying it's too small and lacks clear signs of wreckage.
Yes, I remember reading about that on a discussion board back in university. Someone posted a diagram trying to explain how the physics couldn't add up. But it wasn't just the size of the hole they were stuck on, was it? It was also questions around the lack of visible wings or engine marks on the facade.
That's right, and critics use that as evidence of a government cover-up. But investigations, including one by NIST, definitively showed that the plane's wings sheared off upon impact with the Pentagon's reinforced walls. Aircraft debris like the landing gear and black boxes was recovered from the scene. Eyewitness accounts also confirmed it. People saw a plane.
Exactly. Plus, the explanation around structural reinforcements, they had just renovated that part of the building, making it much more resistant to wider damage. It's fascinating how facts like that often get left out in these debates.
Now let's talk about controlled demolition theories, particularly with the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7. The argument here is that the way the buildings collapsed seemed too methodical to be caused by planes and fire. Theorists claim explosives must have been pre-planted inside the structures.
This one's a biggie. I mean, it's kind of striking how the towers seem to fall so straight down. If you watch the footage without knowing the science, it almost looks too perfect. But then again, there's the science, isn't there?
Certainly is. According to NIST and other experts, the intense fires from jet fuel caused the steel beams to lose about 50% of their strength at just over 600 degrees Celsius. Combined with the structural damage from the impact, it was enough to trigger a progressive collapse. As for World Trade Center 7, it was hit by debris that ignited fires, weakening its internal supports over time until the structure gave way.
Which makes so much more sense when you think about it. But again, those images are powerful. People want answers that feel just as big as the event itself. It's like you said earlier, they struggle with randomness.
And sometimes randomness feels unsatisfying. Groups like Architects Engineers for 9/11 Truth argue that thermite, or even nanothermite, was involved, claiming to find traces in the debris. But their evidence hasn't held up under scientific scrutiny. Critics point out the substances they identified were consistent with construction materials, not explosives.
I mean, doesn't it figure? If their claims about thermite were as decisive as they make it sound, wouldn't more authorities, or at least independent scientists, have backed them by now?
Exactly. And while counter-arguments continue, the bulk of the engineering and forensic data doesn't support these demolition theories. Where does that leave us? Well, we still have to contend with why some people hold on to these suspicions despite the evidence in front of them. And it brings us to an important question. What makes these suspicions so persistent? Conspiracy theories, like those tied to 9/11, don't develop in isolation. They're often reinforced by deeper psychological and societal influences, which is crucial to understanding why movements like the 9/11 Truth campaign still resonate with so many today.
Yeah, and one of the big things seems to be distrust in government, right? Especially in the years following 9/11, with the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq raising eyebrows. A lot of people felt manipulated, even betrayed.
Precisely. That distrust, combined with the chaotic information landscape of the time, created fertile ground for alternative narratives to take hold. When people feel uncertain or powerless, they often seek explanations that provide a sense of control, even if those explanations veer into conspiracy.
And let's not underestimate the power of group identity in all this. Joining the 9/11 Truth movement didn't just provide answers, it gave people a community of like-minded skeptics. There's something comforting in feeling like you're in the know in a world where so much can feel out of control.
Absolutely. But while these movements might offer emotional solace, they come with significant costs. The 9/11 Truth movement, for instance, has often polarised public discourse. By challenging the official narrative, they've added fuel to debates over how we trust institutions and what that means for democracy.
It's wild to think about how something that started on internet forums snowballed into such a massive cultural force. But it's also concerning. I mean, if enough people buy into these theories, it can muddy the waters for real issues, can't it?
Indeed it can, and we've seen this impact not just on political discussions, but also on national security policies. When the public spends its energy debating whether the government orchestrated an attack, it can distract from more actionable concerns like improving counter-terrorism efforts or strengthening emergency responses.
And it can undermine trust even in valid decisions. There's this ripple effect of doubt that goes far beyond just 9/11. It's like a domino effect on how people perceive all kinds of government actions.
You've hit the nail on the head. And while many dismiss conspiracy beliefs as fringe, the reality is they pose real challenges. Critics argue they distort facts, erode public trust, and make it harder to engage in constructive dialogue. At the same time, offering rational responses to these claims, without amplifying them unnecessarily, remains a delicate balancing act.
Totally. So, at the end of the day, what can we take away from all this? Maybe it's about finding ways to rebuild trust and close the gap between people and the institutions they're so suspicious of.
Well said. And perhaps that's the larger challenge we face. Not just debunking conspiracies, but creating an environment where fewer thrive in the first place. On that note, thank you to everyone who's joined us to explore this complex and fascinating topic. It's been a journey.
Absolutely. And that's all for today. Take care, everyone, and thanks for listening.